Welcome to Encounter Grace, where we come face to face with God's work in the world for our good. Join host Jason McKnight as we explore practical issues of community, theology, and leadership in everyday life.
Welcome to Encounter Grace. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jason McKnight, and I'm really glad to have with me my friend BJ Murphy. BJ founded and he runs Magic Mile Media, which includes the Noose News. Maybe you've heard of that more. He served 8 years as mayor of Kinston, and he's just a great friend in this community. BJ, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. This is a nice experience. We're doing some great things here.
Well, we try to, and we keep telling everyone we're doing great things, so I appreciate you taking us up on that. Listen, I love talking to you, and over the years, we've had a lot of chance to talk. Here's why, because you're thoughtful, you're gentle, and you always have something good to say. So I thought, let's invite you on here to have a great conversation about news and about politics and about friends and about how to do life in a small town. So
I appreciate that. Such a great introduction. I might hire you and just have you tag along with me for a little while.
It has the benefit of being true.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Hey, bring us up to date and just let us, what's going on with Magic Mile Media?
Oh, wow. So many things. Magic Mile Media really was started because of my experience during Hurricane Matthew. I was a commission-only sales guy, and I gave up 2 weeks of my life, and when that went south, my income, I said, well, what am I good at? I'm good at business-to-business relationships, the B2B market. I'm also good at social media, not because I was like the best at it. I was forced to get good at it because of the role of being the mayor. And so today, what started off as just let's get a client here or there, see if we can help them with it. Now we've done some major events in our community. We expanded into the news business. We're now doing websites. We are starting to license out our intellectual property as it relates to the news business to a couple. We haven't made those announcements yet, but we've already signed one deal. We're working on a second one in another part of the state. So, I mean, we're doing things to help other entrepreneurs grow their business and have complete control too. So I wake up every day, I have a blast, whether it's a video or audio or the news or with a clients or responding to a manhunt. I mean, there's always something happening.
There's always something. And tell us about the name Magic Mile, because people in Kinston know that, but give us the deal.
That was part of the reason why we chose that. I'm a fan of alliteration, news.
You could be a preacher.
Right. And Magic Mile is certainly, back in the 50s, 60s, Queen Street, downtown Kinston, was called the Magic Mile. If you stood at the top of the hill near the Bentley and just looked down Queen Street, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And the same way, you come to South Queen Street Bridge looking up, I mean, you see the lights at night. So it really had a lot of magic to it. It was kind of the epicenter of shopping in eastern North Carolina. And so the name Magic Mile kind of stuck, but the truth is it hasn't been that magical in the last couple decades because of the decline in population and many other factors. But it was just a kind of a good play on our history, and we added the word media because it was kind of an all-encompassing of what we might do. When you start a company, you have these ideas, but until you start actually doing, it kind of just moved. But it's been a great name for us. And one day when Amazon or Google are trying to compete to buy us out, it will hopefully leave a long-lasting impression on the good things that came out of our community.
I love it. I think it's a great thing. So every morning I wake up, I check my phone after I get coffee and then spend a little time in the Word. But then I check my phone and I do read the Noose News. Right. How's that going? You love that.
I do. And that was actually an intentional marketing ploy. The idea that even though most people consume their news or they remember walking out with the robe on and you got the coffee cup and the dog runs out, gets the newspaper and brings it back, the white picket fence. And so we got accustomed to getting our news first thing in the morning. And so the idea was, if I could make sure that our newsletter, the digital newspaper, so to speak, was in your inbox at the same time you were probably getting your coffee and doing your devotion, then we will still have kind of tacked on to that historical ideologue of this is news, this is how you're supposed to get it. But also make sure it's top of the fold, so to speak, in your notifications, because people get a lot of emails during the day, and then they try to clear as much of it out during the day. But if I was the first thing in your inbox that morning, or the first 2 or 3, then you were more likely to click on it. So it was a very psychological reasons why we did it.
Good
but
idea.
our goal every day is to put out at least 3 original pieces of content. Sometimes we hit 12, sometimes it's 3. But we tend to average around 7 or 8, whether it's a column or help wanted, or an actual news story, or a feel good, this kid got on the scholarship list or something. The kind of community news that your grandparents thought of. That was the idea. We want it to be free. We want to have none of those annoying pop-ups to the what the president or our governor does is really important to our society, but there are thousands of outlets that tell those stories.
Right.
There's only one that's going to talk about a manhunt in your backyard, or some kid got on the dean's list at some college, and we wanted to be that source.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so you know where I get my news. Where do you get your news?
It's so interesting because I'm so in it every day that I know what's coming out in the newsletter every morning at 7 a.m. For the most part, I get my news from a variety of sources. I've set up my Alexa device to give me a flash briefing, so I listen to Fox. I listen to, this is just on the flash briefing, Fox, the Wall Street Journal. I'll listen to WRAL, and then I'll get the weather. During the day, I will flip through on Twitter. I follow a lot of Washington reporters, not just the main outlets, but the actual reporters themselves. Same for the state of North Carolina. I follow a lot of those folks.
Do you follow reporters because you find you resound with how they report? Like what would cause you to follow a reporter?
It has more to do with the access they have and where they are. Like, could you imagine being in the presidential briefing room every day?
Yeah.
I mean, what an awesome experience in and of itself. But if you live in that little bubble, they're tweeting out stuff. They're reporting back stuff.
Right.
And so I follow a lot of those reporters. But I, at any given point during the day, most of the time it's over lunch. If I eat in, I'll flip to Fox, CNN. Rare if I'm checking sports lately. I'm honestly kind of personally a little disillusioned with sports in general.
Right.
But I follow a lot of reporters, and I follow a mixture of CNN, Fox folks. I like just kind of discern for myself.
Yeah. Well, as people are listening to this and thinking about where to get news, talk to us about the difference between news and opinion or commentary.
You and I actually had this conversation a couple months ago, and I think you wrote a really great blog about it. And I would encourage folks, if they haven't read it, to go read your blog. I can't remember your website for
JasonMcKnight.org.
Okay, go check that out, because I thought you did a great job, and we had a good conversation about it. And honestly, we get some of that feedback sometimes. People will make a comment, well, I hate this reporting, and it's like, no, this was this person's opinion.
Right.
There is a big difference, and I think it's healthy for a news organization to allow opinions, but also to report the news. And sometimes, honestly, we get chastised at News for being too right-leaning on the opinions. And I've said, well, do you realize how many times I've asked left-leaning writers to write? And the lack of response that we've received, I can't help who sends us something.
You can invite,
But there is a difference between someone's opinion, certainly, and what is a factual news story. We have some people who will write a letter to the editor, which usually are one-off kind of things. And then we have the weekly, for us in our backyard, Reese Gardner, gotta love him, cute man. Mike Parker is a very thought-provoking author. Tammy Kelly will write something about food, and she tries to be relevant with the time of year. So, we have those types, but then we have a local news story, whether it's a criminal act or an education piece. So, and we work with, in our case, work with our school systems and our private schools well to get that kind of information as well.
It's true, and you do a good job of that. Like
we try.
Yeah, I mean, it's really helpful. Let's talk economics for a minute, because speaking of things that you've written, a few weeks ago you published an article about how Stimulus is contrary to the American dream. Let's just talk about that for a couple of seconds here in this podcast several weeks later.
Yeah, and I'm not a part of the think tanks of why our politicians and economic advisors said direct payment stimulus was the right way to go. My point in my column was that, look, my family is still receiving stimulus money. We're receiving PEBT money. Right. We're a middle income family. Right. We got to accept it because they send it to us. We can't give it, to somebody else. You could be held criminal liable. Right. And so it's like we will spend it, and quite frankly, we have used it to pay down debt. We're in a let's get rid of debt mode. That's something that's we're focused on. But I don't blame people for buying the TVs or cars either.
No. And if they don't have the debt, maybe it's time.
Right. But, I'm a fan, as a Christian and as an American, at my core, providing for those less fortunate. I think both the church and our country have a responsibility to do that.
Yep.
So my point in the column was, look, I don't really need the direct payment stimulus.
Right.
And by continuing to do it, guess what the next generation is going to expect every time there is a disaster? The next Pearl Harbor or 9/11 happens, they're going to go, well, the way to solve this is to give everybody a check. And I'm like, that's not the answer. We survived the housing crisis, right? We did.
Yeah, we all got through it.
Right. It wasn't easy, but we did.
Because we're not guaranteed an inexorable increase in our standard of living. It's just nowhere in the Constitution or the Bible.
Well,
it's just not.
And who's going to pay for it? That's what is just mind-boggling to me is my kids are going to be responsible for these trillions of dollars of debts. I mean, I'm 40. I'm getting into the peak earning years, I guess, of my life. But am I really going to be held liable via my taxes in my lifetime for even something that we're doing today with these $1,400, $1,500 stimulus? I don't know, Pastor. It's very troubling. I'm not an economist, but at my core, I'm going, there's just something that's just not right about this long term.
Yeah, there's something not right long term. All right, how long have you lived in Kinston?
My entire life. I'm 40, all but 3 years. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, that was 3 years ECU. That was it.
Yeah, so you're born and bred here. Okay, what do you love the best about it? What's your favorite thing about K-Town?
Well, certainly there's so many things.
There's so many, you're
right. I mean, I love the people. I love the idea that I can get from one side of the county to the other in like 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, that's with traffic. I mean, and if I need something bigger or better, the towns that we're so close to, Goldsboro, Greenville, New Bern, the beach. I mean, you're 30, 45 minutes away. So I think from a logistical standpoint, we're well positioned. We've got a cute little town. Certainly, it's transitioned over the years. I love our downtown. I'm practically born and raised in downtown Kinston, and my business is there now as well.
Which I'm not local. I've lived here almost 18 years, but I'm not local. And I did not know until before we went on the air, is that Reynolds seafood began with your family. I did not know that.
Johnny is my first cousin, and his cousin Chuck is on his side of the family. But yeah, that was my grandfather's business. Wow. And when my grandfather passed, he gave half to my dad, who was the youngest of 12 Murphy kids, and the other half to J.C. Reynolds, which was my uncle. And J.C. had Johnny and Chad and Sandy, and my dad decided that the fish business wasn't what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. He actually had so much of an emotional connection with his own father being there that he said, I just can't do this.
Right.
So he sold to J.C., and it's Reynolds Seafood, and they've got a great business. Really proud of them.
They do. I love it. I mean, we get fresh fish there all the time. We just love it.
Right.
Just bring it home. Okay, you also were mayor here. I wish I had known when you were mayor that your roots were that deep. I just did not know that.
Yeah, I used to tell people I became mayor at 29. It was 2009. I remember one of the first times I ever spoke in front of a crowd. They introduced me, and someone in the back said, "He's just a baby," and I remember going, I got up to the microphone and I said, "I heard that," and they kind of chuckled, and I said, "Well, I may not be a baby, but I guess I qualify to be mayor because I am changing diapers now." To run for office, you got to have a little bit of a healthy ego. I mean, heck, I got somebody that follows me around with a camera all the time. But I will tell you one thing that settles that real quickly is changing the dirty diaper.
It's true.
Right?
It's true, your little ones.
Yeah, so I was able to identify with folks. Yeah, I mean, I changed a lot of dirty diapers, you know. No, you know, so yeah.
8 years. What was the best part about it?
You know, I think I love being proactive on leadership. Certainly in leadership, you've got to react to challenges like the flood. But I like being proactive on issues and really kind of pushing the envelope, because the mayor's role in our community isn't like the mayor of New York who gets to sign legislation.
Right.
The mayor of Kinston is the chairman of the board. So a chairman isn't the CEO. The chairman doesn't execute.
Right.
The chairman kind of casts vision and gets the body and the organization kind of corralled to go, hey, let's go this way. I missed that part. I loved the Eagle Scout Court of Honor ceremonies.
Yeah.
I loved talking to kids. And I'm mayor of a city, but I would get invited to the county schools because the kids don't know the difference between the chairman of the county commissioners and the mayor.
They don't.
Let's get the mayor here.
Yeah.
So I love talking to kids about how we recycle the water that they flush down the toilet and we end up drinking it later. I just kind of left that out there and expect the parents to call me later.
And because they're calling, my kid will only drink the Coke now.
Right.
Well, what was the toughest part?
The toughest part, honestly, because of how diverse our community is, both economically and racially, that issues related to electorate rates, issues related around race were always very difficult. You need to be honest with each other. We need to be honest with the people. People need to be honest with us. And so sometimes that was a very difficult thing to do. So one thing I loved about being mayor is I got to choose a mayor pro tem.
Right.
Someone who just steps in if I'm ever needed. But that person, the way I structured the board where we sat, would sit right beside me. The city manager sit my right, and the pro tem sit my left. So I could always kind of lean in and go, okay, how can tell me about this? And having the wisdom of somebody like Joe Tyson, for example, and Robbie Swinson,
good guys,
and having a white person and black person helping to lead the body, but people more importantly that I trust,
friends.
Because we saw some things differently. But I can tell you, Pastor, that in leadership, one thing that I value more than anything is trust. I will hire somebody with no skill. But if I can trust them, we can do some great things together.
Yeah, we can train you, or like as an employee. Or I can partner with you even if I disagree, but the trust has got to be there.
Very much so.
And how's your relationship with Mayor Doan Hardy?
It's interesting because initially it was kind of like, it was a little awkward. Here's the guy who unseated me.
Right.
I mean, and I enjoyed 8 years of that role, and I wanted to do it again. So at first it was a little awkward, but certainly pleasant. I mean, I called him that night, congratulated him. I certainly was there at the swearing-in ceremony, but then I had to step back and let him lead. And then it was like 6 months later or so is when I started News News. So then the relationship is a little bit different then, because now we're in the news business.
Right.
But I mean, it's not somebody.
Which I hear they're supposed to keep elected people accountable.
Well, right. So
some of the networks don't know that.
No, that's right.
Anyway,
it is supposed to be what's supposed to happen. So I guess to say is I'm not calling on City Hall.
Right.
I've got staff that if there's an issue with the city or with something we need to address, they're filing reports. I really reduced how much of the chamber outings I personally go to, because I have done my darndest to allow him and other leaders to step into those roles. So I'm still very out there and vocal and proactive, but on a much different level today.
Sure. Well, let's zoom out from Lenoir County, from Kinston, and let's think politics nationally. You're a registered Republican. You elected as a Republican. Look into your crystal ball. Tell us what's next for the GOP.
Well, it's interesting because I've always considered myself a practical Republican.
Practical Republican, I like it.
I'm definitely center right, but governing in and of itself requires the acceptance of the minority voice. whether you're the Democrats in the majority or the Republicans in the majority. The minority voice has to have a voice. It doesn't mean that you're always going to approve everything they do or include everything, but you've got to at least make an attempt. And that's the very difficult thing about politics in Raleigh and D.C. is it becomes so partisan. But in terms of the Republican Party, the President Trump's almost denial of the election results or how that all came to be been an interesting thing to watch politically because I was of the opinion of, hey, the courts said you lost, the Electoral College said you lost, so okay, just tell people, hey, I lost, and move on. But actually the exact opposite happened. It doubled down, culminated in the January 6th Capitol riots. Whether people say he's accountable for that or not, I tend to think he's more accountable than he's admitted to, but that's just my personal opinion.
That's you.
So I really think the Republican Party needs a leader that can unify the base without alienating too many of the people who are like me, who are practical, or the Tea Party. You need somebody who can kind of unify all the different sectors because yes, I'm Republican, but I don't wear it on my sleeves. You know? I mean, I just don't go beating my chest with it. And so it's just interesting to watch what the Congress, Democrat-controlled Congress, and the Democrat-controlled White House do over the next year and a half will have a big role in what happens in 2022.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you then. Put the crystal ball on the Democrat Party. What do you think's coming?
The truth is they've got a small window of time to put forth every single crazy idea they've ever had and the right momentum to pull it off. It'd be interesting to see if they really do that. Like they could shove the stimulus checks down the throats of Republicans and get away with it because they've got the numbers. Whether they actually do that or not remains to be seen. So, and if they don't do it, then it was just like the first couple of years, I think, of President Obama, or somewhere his first term, he had control of the Congress, and they didn't do some things, and they were later held accountable for that.
By their base.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
no,
so
it's true. And same with the beginning of the Trump, and both houses of Congress were Republican, and they didn't get Affordable Care Act changed.
And I will tell you, Pastor, I'm a big fan of checks and balances in our system.
Me too.
Big fan of it. And whether that's the Supreme Court or the House or the Senate or in the governor's office. So, president's office. I'm the same way as North Carolina. I like the idea that Republicans in charge of the General Assembly. Part of me kind of likes the idea we got a Democrat governor. Doesn't mean I really enjoy our governor.
Sure, but the check and balance.
But in terms of the principle, the idea of a checks and balances, I think it's healthy. I guess is my point.
Yeah.
I think it's healthy for our society to have those checks and balances. I think it really is healthy.
So you're not just saying that as a newsman?
No.
Because it makes great headlines?
Well, no. But, and the truth is, that's the kind of talk that would hurt me in the Republican primary.
You're exactly right.
Right?
You're exactly right.
But it's also the true core American value that I really appreciate, and is that you've got to be willing to work with the other side to do what's best for the entire country or the population. Just because I was a Republican that won at 29 doesn't mean that I'm only going to serve Republican interests. My community was 2/3 minority, 2/3 Democrat. Thankfully, 4 years later, I was actually the first person to become mayor as a nonpartisan candidate because we went nonpartisan as well. So you represent everybody once you get in office.
You do. You really do. You represent everyone. And that's why governing is a whole lot harder than campaigning.
It's right. It is, because you can say so many things. You can put out your platform. President Biden put out his platform, all the things he wanted to accomplish. But then when he gets in there, then he's got Speaker Pelosi's agenda and Senator Schumer's agenda. And it goes, okay, well, then you might have one or two splinter votes like Joe Manchin, who's
West
on
Virginia.
the bubble, right? And then whatever Mitch McConnell says could have some weight in that conversation. So you've got all these things pulling at you on top of the idea that you've also in leadership have to respond to things. It's not always about what you want to do. It's about you have to react to a 9/11. How does that change what you're about to do for the next 6 years of your career?
That's right. Well, how do you remain politically engaged but don't lose friends? Because we got to talk about that just for a couple of minutes here. How can I be active in politics or at least thinking about it, but then it just feels like if I say the wrong thing at the wrong time, people are going to drop me.
You know, I part of that for me is even though I'm a very outspoken guy to some degree, I'm not a shock and awe kind of a guy. That's not my core, my nature. But I'm also careful about how often or what I post on social. You know, and the way social media algorithms, you know, you're only seeing the things of people that you identify with the most, because most people mute somebody because they voted for the wrong guy. I mean, or they were happy that Biden was sworn in. I mean, come on. I mean, so you got to be willing to accept others' opinions. But a lot of that is just being careful in what I say and not being outlandish in those comments. The other thing is, truthfully, I don't really get super engaged in the comments on social, and I'm leaning into the social side of this conversation because we're so social.
That's where you
connected.
lose friends.
It is. It's, you know, Pastor, you've got a congregation. I don't know. I've been here several times. 300, 400, 500 people any given Sunday here. Well, pre-COVID. Sense, but
it's a little small. 250, 300.
But I would imagine that you've got some white people, some black people, you've got some Republicans, you've got some Democrats,
and we're super pumped.
But you have one unifying cause here. You agree on something. And I think that's kind of the way I approach my friends. I have friends who are Republican, Democrat, young, old, black, white, doesn't really matter to me. I truly care about, are you happy? You know, and I'm very careful about not being too outlandish. I'm just as quick to criticize Trump as I am Biden, McCrory as I am Cooper, and because I think it's only fair to do that.
Well, this podcast is called Encounter Grace. And so let me just ask you this. Over the last week, month, where have you encountered grace from God?
Well, I'll tell you, for me, and I know by the time this airs, the time will be a little bit different, but for me, I got to spend the last weekend with my father, you know, and a year ago, he was scheduled to have a heart surgery, and he ended up having a stroke. And, you know, the way strokes work, you think of a stroke, but it's actually a series of strokes. There's several of them, but he had a stroke and ended up almost debilitating him. I spent 1 week in the hospital. It was like 4 nights, and it was almost as excruciating for me to watch him go through this as it was for him to go through the pain of, you know, not knowing where he is and those kind of things. So he had the stroke. He ended up recovering, came over to my house for lunch on a Friday. He was going to spend the weekend with me, had a stroke that day at my house. Set him back again. And then around Thanksgiving time, he was well enough, strong enough. He ended up having the heart surgery he needed. And so he is, hopefully by the time this airs, he will have finally got his dentures in. So he'll be getting some of that meat back in his bones. But you're just spending the weekend. I toured him around like a celebrity. He went to Pizzavilla and Reynolds and Lovick's. And to me, that time with my father was great.
Boy, that is encountering grace, I'm telling you. That is a great thing. BJ, thank you. In a busy schedule, thank you for taking time to encourage us here as we listen to Encounter Grace, as we're part of this community. Thank you for being part of Kinston community. And friends, thank you for being part of Encounter Grace. And we'd love for you to subscribe to this. If this was helpful for you, invite a friend and pass it on to them. That would be great. You could bless them with this. Like, comment, share on Facebook, YouTube. We'd love it all. But thank you for joining us here on Encounter Grace, and have a great day.
This is a ministry of Grace Fellowship Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Visit gracekinston.org or follow us on Facebook and Instagram.